Mini episode 510 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.info.
The FDH Lounge. You want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to mini episode number 510 of the FDH Lounge. This is FDH Managing Partner Rick Morris, and we have a very special treat for you today. A gentleman that we have had on the show previously that we very much enjoyed talking gridiron with. He is back on with us today to talk about Championship Sunday. Now, of course, mini episode 509 was our standard weekly, essentially our football show within the show. We are the show where nothing is off topic, but during football season, of course, we hit everything every week. So we've already done our standard show, which, as those of you who are regular listeners know, a little more hardcore than some of the other stuff you're going to find out there. So we're going to kind of mix it up today, hit some different angles, not worry as much about keeping it hardcore, just kind of go where the spirit leads us. The gentleman that we're speaking with actually has covered one of the four teams involved in this a couple of times per year, including this year because it's a divisional rival, the Indianapolis Colts. So he is probably a little bit more hands-on familiar with the AFC game. We'll probably spend a tad more time on that, but we're going to hit both games here because obviously this gentleman is well-versed to be able to speak on both of them. He is, of course, Drew Dougherty from Texans TV. You can find him on Twitter at Dougherty Drew. That's DOUGHERTYDREW, at Dougherty Drew. You can catch him there. Of course, the HoustonTexans.com website with all of his fine programming and football analysis. We are pleased to be able to bring back onto the show to talk football with us the one and only Drew Dougherty. Drew, welcome to the program today, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks a lot for having me on again.
Hey, thanks so much for coming back on with us. Really appreciate it. Enjoyed having you on previously. Your analysis of what's to come is going to be very welcomed. I'd like to start with a general question on the AFC side, that being because your head coach down there, Bill O'Brien, of course, part of the Belichick coaching tree, which by and large, and I have to say as a lifelong Browns fan, has been way more unfortunate than fortunate, although Bill O'Brien, with what he did at Penn State and so far at Houston, showing signs of breaking out of that shadow, if you will. Do you get the sense on a week like this, O'Brien having seen the Colts in division twice this year, obviously it's not like Bill Belichick hasn't seen Andrew Luck before. He's had some success. But does that strike you as the kind of conversation, if you had a guess, that might be taking place this week? Belichick reach out to a coach like that in the division, an old friend of his, and say, hey, what are you seeing about Andrew Luck that might help us to be able to break him down this week?
It's a good question. It wouldn't stun me if that happened, but, I think if you were to ask O'Brien, the coach who has the most influence on him, he might also throw out George O'Leary because, from the mid-'90s until about 2004-ish, he was with O'Leary at Georgia Tech and all that other stuff. They did work together in the ACC. But, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if Belichick were to kind of pick O'Brien's brain about it. But, on the other hand, Belichick has been around the block so many times before, so ingenious in how he prepares. And he's got a squad of people that are, prepared a little bit differently and carry different job titles and have different roles than probably your standard NFL front office and coaching staff typically do. They've got a pretty big analytics staff compared to other NFL teams. He's got some buffers, some guys that kind of are, people who kind of watch out for different things, checks and balances, et cetera, than other NFL squads do. So, yeah, it wouldn't stun me that if Belichick were to reach out, but I think he's got a lot of different information at his disposal compared with other places.
Very good point there, and excellent point again with Bill O'Brien and George O'Leary. That's a topic that outside of Houston you don't hear remarked about as much, but part of that coaching tree as well, definitely. Having seen Indianapolis in the division, I'd like to get your sense of last week's game because myself and our other regular football analyst on the show, Kyle Ross, who joins me every week, we were in agreement on our last show that we had recorded actually yesterday in looking at that because we were both wrong. We expected Denver to move on last week, as did most people, albeit Kyle was wise enough to defer on not making a pick of Denver laying the points as I was. He was smart enough to lay off of that one. Both of us had the sense looking at it. That's way more about the Denver implosion than it was anything Indianapolis, and everyone this week has been so quick to say, oh, they're making the progression, they're taking the next step. I'm a little dubious of that, as I said. What do you get the sense, looking back on that game, do you get the sense that it was Indianapolis kind of maturing, coming into their own, becoming where we sort of expected they would become in 2014 or 2015 at this stage of the game, or to you was it more about Denver coming apart at the seams unexpectedly?
I think you got to give the Colts a lot of credit. You know, obviously Peyton Manning was not the Peyton Manning that we're accustomed to, but I've seen this Colts team, twice a year since I started working with the Texans in 2009, and Andrew Luck is the real deal, and they can be extremely explosive. I mean, the Texans, they put up a 24-point geyser on the Texans when they played here on Thursday night earlier in the season. They did that in the first quarter. They went up 24-zip. Texans fought back and came within a touchdown of beating them, but they ultimately ended up losing. But with T.Y. Hilton, with the guys that he can throw to, I'm very impressed with Andrew Luck. I think they can absolutely go up to New England and beat the Patriots. I don't think they will, but I think they're certainly capable of it. And I would tend to skew more towards giving credit to the Colts than downgrading what the Broncos did.
Interesting. Okay. Well, in looking at the game,
I say that, and let me interrupt. Sorry, I say that because the Texans practiced for a week in August, and I mean that's an eternity ago, I know in football terms, but they practiced for a week in August at the Denver facilities, and then they played with the Bronx on a Saturday night, and it was very physical, and the Texans didn't screw around in that regard. They were very fast, and they wound up beating the Broncos in that exhibition game. It didn't matter, but for the first quarter and a half, they really befuddled Peyton Manning in that offense. And the Texans starters on defense only played a half of the first quarter, but they really kind of gave him fits. And, after the Texans left town, John Elway has said, they were a little bit faster, a little bit more physical than we were, and I wasn't pleased with that. And that's one of the reasons, a very small one, but it's one of the reasons John Fox is gone now, because he didn't like what he saw preparation-wise, in what happened there. And I think because of that, and seeing that I don't want to say lackadaisical, that's the wrong word, but just that softer side, that lack of an edge, it didn't surprise me that that's what happened last weekend. I think you combine that with the capabilities that Luck and the Colts have. I was not stunned by what happened, and I wouldn't be stunned if Luck and the Colts were able to win this weekend.
All right, I want to examine that a little bit because from a hardcore football perspective, this is almost sort of the ultimate chicken or the egg question as far as why something happens. Is it a matter of credit on the one side, blame on the other? If you're prepared to assign credit to Indianapolis for what they did, let's poke into that a little bit. To what would you attribute that? Because when you look at something like Denver's stellar run defense numbers through the course of the regular season and what Dan Herron, of all people, ended up doing to them on Sunday, and again, me being in the state of Ohio, I'm familiar with Dan Herron's past track record, but again, I don't think there's anybody out there at this stage of the game that would indicate they're not being caught by surprise here. Is it a matter of Indianapolis bringing out the superior schematics? Because that's the one way where I could kind of buy into what you're talking about here. They did some things Denver wasn't expecting. They mixed it up because Again, on the one side of the ball, Peyton Manning making his mistakes, probably a mixture at this point of old age, and yeah, he probably did have some leg injuries to various degrees going on here. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle on that, but Peyton Manning's not the alpha and omega of what happened on Sunday. All around, Denver got bested. Do you attribute that more so to the preparation, Chuck Pagano and company, Pep Hamilton, those guys bringing out things Denver didn't expect?
I just attribute it more to playoff football and, nuanced matchups. With regard to the Colts and the Broncos, I think that was a good matchup for the Colts. Now, it hasn't been a good matchup for the Colts when they played the Patriots, in the past. I think the margin of defeat has been something like 20 points, but it's going to be different this weekend. And it takes me back to 2 years ago when the Texans were in the playoffs and whatnot. 11 and 12, they fought the Ravens tooth and nail, and they're very, very close matchups, and I thought they matched up well with them. When they went up to New England in 2012 in the playoffs, they got beat like a drum, and it happened 2 times in a row. They went up on Monday Night Football. They were 11 and 1 in the regular season. They go up there and just get pounded by the Patriots. Patriots exploited, a weakness at inside linebacker, and they were able to get inside linebackers on running backs out, lined up as wide receivers. So I think it's more of a picking on and picking up the nuances and the matchups and exploiting things more so than anything. But, at the end of the day, you kind of referenced it and alluded to it in the question. A lot goes into it. It's not just one hard and fast. It was X that won. I mean, it's so many different little things that make up a defeat, make up a victory.
Absolutely, yeah. It's there were a lot of different elements to it. It happened on both sides of the ball, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this too, since we're trying to look back and kind of assess from last weekend here. Something that was interesting, the commonality in both AFC divisional games last week, New England and Indianapolis, both teams were statistically inferior at running the ball and stopping the other run. For that matter, you had the same thing in the NFC, which is really weird. Seattle and Dallas were both better at both of those. All 4 games featured one team that was better in the trenches on both sides of the ball. In the AFC, the team, at least statistically, weaker in the trenches on both sides of the ball emerged. Does that tell us anything about the status of the game at this point in time? Of course, New England got away from the run altogether in that game, which was kind of odd, although, again, they attacked Baltimore's huge weakness and stayed away from their pretty big strength. But what does that tell us that these 2 teams that are statistically more finesse emerged from last weekend?
Well, you got to go back and look at turnovers, and off the top of my head, I don't know what the turnover ratio were, but I do remember a Flacco interception to McCourty, and I mean, I think those play such a key role in it, swing momentum. So I think you always got to factor that in, because as well as anybody, stats don't always tell a story. They give you sometimes a picture of what might have happened, but they don't give you the exact exact outcome of what happened. But there's so many goofy things that can happen. But I always go back and want to look at what the turnovers were, what the time of possession was, and big plays as opposed like explosive plays and the number of explosive plays you had as opposed to picking up chunks here and there.
That makes sense. I could see that being the case because, you turn the momentum on a dime, and that's where a lot of times you get these defining plays that happen. And yet, you have these 2 teams where New England and Indianapolis statistically inferior at running the ball during the regular season with the teams that they played last week now facing one another. You now have Indianapolis with, as I alluded to before, Dan Herron. They've been on a little bit of a roll using him. There was a statistical metric I read about earlier today that indicated, believe it or not, I guess when he gets more than 8 carries a game, they've been pretty hard to beat. When he's under 8 carries, they haven't done as well. New England, we've seen what's happened with them running it down Indianapolis' throats, the complete photo negative of the game plan that they used against Baltimore last week. So in a game where people are going in talking about Luck and Brady and this Titanic matchup, potential changing of the guard, Do you get the sense that we may see a little bit more in the trenches between these teams, a little bit more pounding the football, moving the chains than what the media narrative might suggest?
Sure. I mean, I was about to interrupt you and say, you bring up the names Luck and Brady, and it might come down to LeGarrette Blount. I mean, look a year ago, in January, 4 touchdowns. Wouldn't stun me at all to see LeGarrette Blount or whoever it is they trot out there at running back, do some big things and pound the roll. It's all about the matchups and the weaknesses that Belichick and conversely Pagano might think they can exploit on the other side.
That's what it comes down to a lot of the time, absolutely. I'm going to phrase the question for the AFC game the way that I'm going to on the NFC game as well when we get to that, and because it's similar in both instances here, that we have a fairly significant favorite and underdog in both games here, and part of that is, again, in the case of Indianapolis, it's the running game that's been a question mark through a good part of the year, and questions about balance on offense because of that, even if it's looked a little bit better recently. They've overcome somehow or another the loss of Robert Mathis this year, which I have to tell you, I thought was absolutely going to doom that defense, and they played pretty well without him. But in both instances, we have a fairly significant favorite at home. So we'll start with the AFC game. What's your scenario for Indianapolis? If they pull off the upset of the favorite on Sunday, what do you think we'll be talking about on Monday vis-a-vis how they got it done?
Andrew Luck, and maybe a little bit of Dan Herron, like you were just mentioning before, the 8 carries or more, because I think that with that offense, because they run it so rarely, if they're running it more than 8 times a game, it means they're probably up. They probably jumped out to a bit of a lead. But I think if we're talking about the Colts and them pulling off a win, it's going to come down to Andrew Luck and maybe a little Jordan Werner coming off the edge, Vontae Davis, a cornerback. But Luck, he's from Houston. He went to Stratford High School, same place Craig James played his high school ball, and so we're familiar with him down here. And he just seems like a guy who is he's like I call him the zombie quarterback. He's never dead. I mean, I've never felt safe when the Texans have had a lead against Luck. I mean, I think they've only beaten him once, and it was the first time he played the Texans, and that was in 2012 in December. And he's won every game since. So, he's going to be the guy, for better or worse, deservedly or not, by virtue of what he plays, the position quarterback. I think that's what we would be talking about if, on Monday, if the Colts had come out victorious. And I know I'm not veering off of and being creative there, but that's just kind of what I think would be our topic of conversation if a win happens.
No, that's a good point. I mean, and I asked you for most likely, not the sexiest angle. I think you're right about that, actually. If he goes for 400 or 450 and they pull off a win, then no, I think that's absolutely right. Let me ask you this here, and I want to see if you have a theory about this. A little continuity, a little callback to mini episode 509, our other Championship Sunday preview this week. I threw something out, and I said I don't understand why this happened. Maybe you, from your familiarity with the Colts, know. They come into this game with a better time of possession than Patriots. Patriots at 29-37. Colts at an average time of 31-54. Seems a little high for a team that had an iffy running game throughout the year. Andrew Luck's completion percentage, I believe, was just shy of 62%. So it's not a guy who's hovering in the high 60s where you think everything he's throwing is landing in somebody's hands. There's not as many incompletions. How, in your estimation, if you have an idea, don't worry if you don't, because I don't have an idea either, how do the Colts go 31-54 on time of possession with the makeup of that team?
It's a passing attack that can, while they have T.Y. Hilton, they can get explosive on you. They can also have a move-the-chains passing attack where they hit Fleener and Allen, their tight ends, and you get 6-7 yards there, and then you pop off one for about 14 yards, and then there's an incompletion, and you got another 13-yarder, and they just kind of matriculate the ball down the field, but they do it with passes, short to intermediate. I suppose that's one way. I need to look at their turnover differential. I know the Texans defense had the most turnovers in the NFL this season, but I could see category. You get a turnover here and you get the ball back for your team. That's one, but it they're such an interesting team because a lot of people, and I used to be guilty of this, a lot of people said, oh, it's Andrew Luck and a bunch of garbage. But really, if you step back and look at that team, it's a good team. T.Y. Hilton, I think, is an elite receiver. I think you've got two really good tight ends there in Kobe Fleener and Dwayne Allen. Reggie Wayne, we haven't talked about him. You know, he might be in the Hall of Fame someday. You know, and then you go to Mathis, although he hasn't played at all. He's a good player. I think Vontae Davis, a solid, above-average cornerback. Your special teamers, both your specialists, Adam Vinatieri, he's probably going to be a Hall of Famer. The punter might be the best punter in football. I mean, so they have talent there. To say it's Andrew Luck and a garbage heap, I think is very, very ignorant. Now, he gets a lot of that credit, deservedly so, but you got to – I wonder how miffed and how plus some of those other guys that aren't named Luck in that locker room are when they hear that stereotype that it's the fighting Andrew Lucks of Indianapolis, you know? So, I mean, I guess that's a long, roundabout answer to your question about time of possession. But I think, you know, to be very short, they can do some nice things in the short to intermediate passing game that sort of would substitute as a run in other offenses.
Well, and your larger point's very well taken, that it's a great team effort on their part. As I said, I expected that defense, particularly after what they showed the year before, to be absolutely DOA after Robert Mathis went down, and they proved me wrong.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they have really risen above expectations this year as a team, no question about it. Andrew Luck has been, I think, about what we expected because the expectations are high. Your point is very well taken. Everybody else has risen up, and that has allowed them to become the one interloper this weekend because I think a lot of us going into the season said New England and Denver in the championship game. I did before the season. In the NFC, I actually was right. I said Green Bay at Seattle. That will end the NFC campaign just as it started at week one. Right about that, but again, I'm sure I wasn't the only one that was saying that coming into the season. We got the matchup we expected. But again, for a lot of us out there, and again, I'm somebody who really reveres Championship Sunday. I always throw a bash for it every year with my friends. I love it. It's one of my favorite days on the calendar. I've said I'm not really looking forward to these two games as much as the two last year because I have some of the questions about the underdogs being able to keep it close. And, of course, with the Packers, do you have much concern about their ability to stop the run? They rallied late in the year to become 23rd in the league, so give them credit for that. They were significantly worse against the run previously. With Aaron Rodgers limping around as he is right now, he did enough against Dallas last week, but, of course, against Seattle with the 12th man there, it's a different story altogether. Do you have some of the qualms I do about the Packers keeping this one close even?
Yeah, I mean, it's a justifiable concern, that's for sure, because, you know, you talk to those poor Dallas Cowboy fans, and they'll tell you, you know, that they got robbed and that they should be up there this week. But and I say that with a little bit of irony, obviously. But yeah, you know, it's absolutely justifiable because of, you know, the injury and what he's going to be facing with a superior defense than Dallas's. But I mean, hey, Cowboys went on the road earlier this season and the Seahawks, so why can't the Packers, who just beat the Cowboys, do the same thing? You know, they've got, I think, a superior quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, but, you know, they were able to, I guess, I don't want to say limit DeMarco Murray, but they were able to do what they did against him, and, you know, why can't they do that against Marshawn Lynch in Seattle?
Well, before we get into some of the nitty-gritty of it, let me just ask you the overarching macro question, same way I did for the AFC game. If somehow or another Green Bay gets it done on Monday, and because of their track record as a franchise in recent years and what they've done, and the fact that Indianapolis is still in the clawing their way up phase, if there was going to be an upset, I dare say most of us would probably figure somehow or another Green Bay gets it done. You're never out of it with Aaron Rodgers. What are you thinking? What's the scenario that we're talking about Monday if it happens? Is it as much Aaron Rodgers oriented as you thought the Andrew Luck scenario might be, or are there other factors that might come into play that might help Green Bay pull the upset?
Absolutely. Again, I hate to stick with the chalk there, but yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, I think he's going to be the MVP this year. I think he'll get the award over Andrew Luck. But yeah, if we're talking about a Green Bay win on Monday, it's going to be due to what Aaron Rodgers was able to do.
I would have to agree with that. That makes a lot of sense to me. How concerned would you be as a Seahawks fan when you're looking at the fact that last year about this time they were really kind of rounding into form, integrating Percy Harvin into the offense. They gave them the option with the jet sweeps, which they absolutely devastated Green Bay with in week one. I know they were counting on Paul Richardson to pick up the slack late in the year. He ends up going on IR. We saw last week that Russell Wilson has a very, very underrated capacity. He's still underrated, I think, at this stage of the game for elevating the talent around him, the wide receivers, the tight end, getting those guys open and allowing them to make big plays. But how concerned would you be as a Seahawks fan at this point in the game as far as Seattle's diminished ability to be explosive if they need it against a team like Green Bay?
I'm not too terribly concerned because, you know, you were bringing it up earlier in this talk. I mean, they can run the ball so well, and they can just choke you out with a guy like Marshawn Lynch. And, you know, you got that defense, and they can do what they do there. You know, I'm not overly concerned with all that.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't be either if I was the 12th man sitting there. That's the one thing that because when you're looking at Seattle, that's the first thing you start looking at. What are the potential chinks in the armor? And that's the first one I kind of round back to. That if they need to be explosive in the passing game, can they be? They had moments in the second half against Carolina. And popped it open. Is there anything else? Because they look like really a cyborg type of team at this point. That's why they were my pick to repeat, because they're still, I think, ascendant because of their age. They're still on the curve of potentially getting better. But are there any other potential chinks in the armor that you identify with Seattle at this point, or is it pretty much down to that one?
I think it's down to that one. I want to see, though, how Aaron Rodgers attacks that secondary because it is, you know, a secondary that we hear so much about, you know, Bam Bam Cam, Richard Sherman, et cetera, Earl Thomas. I mean, I wonder if because he's such a surgeon back there and because he can put the ball in windows that other guys can't, most other mortals can't, you know, I want to see what he goes after and how much he spreads it around, how deep he goes, how much over the middle he goes, how much he brackets the sideline, if he stays away from Sherman the whole time like he did the last time they played. Does he mix it up? You know, there's so many variables there with what he does. That's what I'm curious to see. You know, and I think, boy, I mean, when he's on, and we saw him on firsthand in 2012 at Energy Stadium. He threw 6 touchdowns, and the Texans had a pretty good secondary and recovering Jordy Nelson and company pretty well, but he was sliding it in there and really putting it where only his guys could catch it. And I mean, I have the utmost respect for that guy and what he can do, even on a bum leg.
Absolutely, yeah. To me, he is the standard in the game right now. I agree with you completely. There was an excellent column breaking down some of the X's and O's that I believe was Andy Benoit that wrote for MMQB. I had referred people to it previously, urged them again to go check that out, where he was talking about Rodgers going after Sherman. You figure this time around it's inevitable. It certainly seemed to compromise their game plan the first time around, not going after him. He was talking about a scenario where they're running maybe multiple wide receivers on that side at him, try and run some picks, maybe try to induce confusion, get Sherman to bite on the wrong guy. The ball goes to the other guy. Is that, in your sense, the likeliest outcome for where they're trying to put the ball on Sherman's side, is where they try to use some trickery like that? Because it's hard to imagine them going right at him.
Boy, you're asking the wrong guy there. I mean, if I knew how to attack the Seattle defense and the Seattle secondary, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. I'd probably be hunkered down in some office somewhere in the dark, looking at film, getting ready for a championship game. But I mean, what you mentioned, yeah, they might do that. They might go off script and do some other things too. But I have no clue on that one. That's a great question.
Well, you know, doing the show here, we're just supposed to pontificate and act like we have all the answers, and this is what I would do. And, hey, if I was playing Madden, this is how I would go after Sherman. So. But, yeah, you're right.
He is so good, and the guys around him backing him up. And those safeties, I mean, what better safety tandems have you seen in your lifetime than that one? I mean, you can count them on one hand if you can name them, you know?
No, you're right about that. You know, and Bill Barnwell doing the breakdown on Grantland prior to the season when he was assessing how they rated with other secondaries of all time and pronounced them number one, even with a guy in the second cornerback slot that probably even most hardcore fans couldn't really tell you much about. But just the other three guys alone, the fact that we're talking about arguably the greatest secondary of all time, everything else you got on that offense, too, they've been darn tough against the run. Again, looking down the road, Russell Wilson, he's just about at the point where he's got to get paid. Sherman got paid after last year, so you can see some cracks in the foundation coming just because keeping the entire band together is going to be untenable over a period of time. But, yeah, I mean, in the short term, it's kind of hard to imagine anybody taking them down, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's very tough to imagine. But, you know, that's the beauty of the NFL in my eyes, because there was no way that the 07 Giants were better than the 07 Patriots. They beat them in that Super Bowl, but that was not a team. They were just a better team that day. You know, that's the beauty of this game. We could be talking next week about Aaron Rodgers going in and throwing 5 touchdowns, and I can hear Joe Buck in my mind saying, you know, something like, and on a day that we never thought would happen. I mean, I could just see all sorts of unlikely circumstances going on. Because, you know, we probably all didn't really think Andrew Luck and company were going to go to Denver and do what they did. But that's the beauty of this game. If there's a chink in the armor, it's going to get exposed, but it might only happen one time. But the time it happens could be in the big game that, you know, is the Super Bowl or the conference title game.
Well, this is kind of strange to picture, but under the circumstances, I get the sense it might be the case, and maybe it's because Aaron Rodgers has already won a Super Bowl and has already broken through. But if he goes into Seattle Sunday, is there a chance that when he's giving the Hall of Fame speech in Canton and he's reflecting back on his career someday, that could go down as the defining moment of his great career? Because to beat Seattle in Seattle at this stage of the game with everything they got going on, I would never say anything's bigger than a Super Bowl, but on an individual level, it seems hard for me to fathom any kind of greater personal accomplishment.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and while you're bringing that up, it made me think of the Emmitt Smith game against the New York Giants when he had the separated shoulder. I mean, that wasn't that was not a playoff game. It wound up kind of cementing their playoff status and giving them the bye week, giving them home field throughout. You know, that's kind of the game, the defining moment, I suppose, of Emmitt Smith's career, and it wasn't in a Super Bowl. So, yeah, I guess I could go with that. I mean, I think a lot of it, now if you were to lay an egg and lose in the Super Bowl, probably it's not remembered as fondly, but if you were to go do that this weekend and then the Pack goes on and win the Super Bowl, yeah, I put a lot of weight behind that question, which is a good question that you just posed.
Thanks. Yeah, it just kind of was rattling through my mind because as far as achievements go, beating Seattle at Seattle right now, that's got to be the toughest thing in the game to do. And he has a lot in front of him this weekend, no question about it. Like a lot of the Chalky McChalkersons out there, I am looking at Seattle and New England this weekend, both winning and covering, meeting in the Super Bowl, Seattle over New England. Any sense of what lies ahead in the last 3 games of the season that you feel free to hazard guess on?
You know, just because you're going Chalky McChalkerson, I'll go a little bit off. I just think since they haven't won it all in a decade, I'm going to go with the Colts here. You know, and if the Colts don't win, I'm going to go with whoever comes out of the NFC. I just don't see the Patriots pulling it off because they've just, for whatever reason, they've faltered in every ultimate game of their season since, and I just think that's going to continue this year. I think it's either the Colts or whoever comes out of the NFC.
And
there's not much logic to that. Not much logic to that, but it's just a gut, you know? Just my gut.
Okay. Well, look, there's a lot to be said for gut feelings because in the national championship game the other night, in my head, I said, how could I say that anybody is going to stop Oregon enough or be able to keep up with them? Yeah. In my gut, I was saying Urban Meyer. My gut was right. My head was wrong. And so I have a very good example in the very recent past of that being the case. So I understand what you're saying. And for Seattle, again, they're going to have New England standing in the way, trying to stop them to be the first team to repeat in the Super Bowl since New England a decade ago. Seattle first has to get past Green Bay, which was the last team to repeat as NFC champions. So they have two teams that are significant obstacles in the next couple of games here, or potentially if they make it past this weekend, I suppose. But truly a great pleasure breaking down these games with you, as I knew it would be, Drew Dougherty. Thank you so much for joining us. Keep up the great work on Texans TV, and definitely look forward to talking some more football with you on the show in the future.
Hey, I appreciate you having me on, and my 1.5-year-old daughter, Marie, I don't know if you hear her squawking in the background. She says hello, too, and she says go Texans, even though they're not playing. So there we go.
That's what she was saying, huh? Yeah. They teach them early down in Houston, no question about that.
Yes, we do.
Give her my best. I'm sure she'll understand that at this point. And, again, I really, really appreciate having you on. And like I said, the pleasure was all ours. Definitely look forward to talking football with you more as time goes along. Really enjoy your work with Texans TV. Thank you so much, Drew. And thank you all today for joining us, everybody, for mini episode number 510 of the FDH Lounge.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, waitresses, strippers, bartenders, garbage men, janitors, microwave popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and The Periodic Table of Elements.